So this is my discussion board post for the Hellenic versus Hellenistic eras and everything that changed in that. So firstly, they talk about political differences of the two times. So first of all, when it comes to like how the government is shaped and everything, before this, a lot of Greek polis or polis, I guess, were more um, like depending on what you're talking about, obviously, because Sparta was different and everything. But there was a lot of them that like were trying to go towards democracy, especially like the longer that it went on. So they sort of like were constantly looking for getting their citizens to be able to vote and everything. As long as you went on, especially in places like Athens. This changes in the Hellenistic period because more and more polis start to say that they are like more democratic, but in fact, they're just looking for like not tyrannical, and they're looking for not what was previously put in by Alexander the Great. So they're looking for something that's just a little easier as a government to live under, I guess. On top of that, because there's not as much voting, and even in Athens, they don't have a lot of the voting rights that they used to, and they don't have the same democratic government that they used to. Because of that, there's just not as much voting in the area, and there's not as much like representation of the people and everything in their government. So that's a huge change. And then on top of that, there's a lot of kingships, not only in the area that we today would call Greece, but also in the area that was like taken over by Alexander the Great. Like the whole thing, there's just a lot of kingships and a lot of sort of mini empires, I guess you could say, that were put together that began to become like the real political put together, like the way that governments were formed in that era. So then we go to social. So, first of all, women had a bit of a change when it comes to what they were able to do. They were able to take part in some of their like different careers and stuff. This was really, really different from what had become before Alexander the Great, which was that women really weren't supposed to do anything and usually stayed indoors for most of their life. So the ability to be a little more than that, and a little like able to look into their own careers and things was like really different and interesting. Also the idea of how to get like an honorable career changes, because before Alexander the Great, a lot of that was wrapped up in war. So it was about being a leader in war or being a soldier in war and stuff like that. So this changes because war kind of stops being so prevalent after Alexander the Great. And so people have to find ways to still have, those honors or whatever without war. And so some of the ways they do that is through education and literature and sort of intelligent based careers, like writing and stuff like that, as well as being like public speakers and stuff, writing speeches and everything. So it changes, how they get that ability to have an honorable career and everything. And then you get to how colonization changed. So before that, a lot of Greek like polis that would have colonization, like actual colonies, they were usually like physical, and they were usually spread to do trade and stuff like that. Um, However, after Alexander the Great, that stops happening so much, as like a sort of cultural change happens around a larger area. So, for example, a lot of people in the area start to speak Greek and stuff. And although that's not like a physical colonization, it's still like a huge cultural change that happens because Greeks were involved, kind of. You know what I mean? Like, because it's the Greek language and everything. It's just, I thought it was interesting to mention because the, larger scale colonization that Greek city states used to do doesn't necessarily happen afterwards. So, yeah. And then also, the community participation usually this is something that kind of was brought from before, I think, but the Greeks were really big into being economically like involved in your community and usually giving back in some way that could usually the people who were richer who were giving usually did it so that they could look good or did it because they believed you should always give more to your neighbor or something like that. When you do it in this afterwards, though, there's a lot of idea that that's pretty much the only thing that can keep tensions down between people of different socioeconomic status. So yeah. Then we have the cultural aspect. So when it comes to art, art tends to become like specific sort of poses and stuff. Like Alexander the Great had one specific pose that he would always put himself in and everything. So statues start to become a bit more streamlined, so to speak, and everything. But it is a completely different art form. Art style anyway, than what was before. So that's like an interesting change. Also, when they do like things that are written, like when they start to do plays and dramas and they start to do like other literature works and everything, there tends to be less criticism of any king or leader that's there, which is big because beforehand, a lot of Greek stuff was usually commenting on how culture worked. And also, Greeks were not afraid to criticize the people who led them because they believed it was their right to say what they believed. And so you can see this huge change on how they no longer, maybe they don't feel safe saying stuff like that, or they no longer think that they need to say stuff like that or something. So, yeah. And then, of course, philosophy can be counted as really all of it. But you see a change from the philosophers around, the Socratic era, in like that post whatever. All of that was based off of like questioning everything around you and questioning why it was the way it was and how it got there and everything. And you can see that in Plato and what we assume to be Socrates' thoughts, since Plato wrote down a lot of Socrates' stuff. And then also you can see a lot of it in Aristotle's things, though he was more of a natural kind of person. He's like, this is how you see it naturally, so naturally, this is what comes next, sort of thing. However, afterwards, you start to get things like Stoicism, which are a total acceptance almost of what's around you and just believing that you need to, like, find happiness in the way it is, sort of thing. And so it doesn't question a lot of things like other things would do. For example, Plato's work, The Republic, questioned whether or not democracy was the best thing for Athens to be doing. And the answer happened to be no. They believed that a aristocracy would be a better version than democracy. And in fact, democracy is one of the worst constitutions you can have. And is considered unjust and intemperate and all sorts of things. But when you're talking about Stoicism, it doesn't question, well, is a kingship correct or is it not? It's just like, yes, this is, because they're under a kingship, for whatever reason, Stoicism is just like, well, this is exactly what it should be. And it doesn't seem to ask the same question of why. Why did it happen that way? And why, how did it get here and everything? And so you can see those sorts of questions kind of walk away from the traditional sort of Greek philosophy.